Okay, so welcome everybody to this event that is being co-organized between NORRAG and the Center for Sociodigital Futures on AI and digital inequities. Right, so on to the main part of the meeting now. So this is our agenda. We're absolutely thrilled to have such a fantastic group of speakers, and we're all very aware that, AI, artificial intelligence, is the mot du jour. It was high on the agenda of UNESCO's Digital Learning Week 2 weeks ago, and also at the UN General Assembly in New York last week, in education and across all of the SDGs. But we also know that there is more to it and hype alone. And the keynote and the panels that we've brought together for you today are from a group of people who have been working at the forefront of this issue of AI and digital inequities, justice and ethics for a long time. Before we dive into that, we are thrilled to welcome Sohbi Tawil, who is the Director of the Future of Learning and Innovation in the Education sector at UNESCO, to open this event. Sohbi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Moira, and thank you for this opportunity. Just for a few words of welcome. Always a pleasure to be associated with NORRAG. We've been partnering with NORRAG for quite some time, and I must say the South also knows campaign resonates obviously very well with concerns at UNESCO and our as an intergovernmental international organization, and our approaches to the knowledge commons and to linguistic cultural diversity as the wealth of humanity in the way we understand the knowledge commons. And very pleased that this is co-organized with the Center for Sociodigital Futures, and we're keen also to be starting out on our partnership with the center, in particular in our strand of work on the futures, digital learning futures, as part of our wider work on the future of education. Maybe just to say from UNESCO's side, I mean, our approach to development generally, to education, and this also applies to technologies and technology in education, is what we would qualify a humanistic one. So first, that it is based on the principle of respect of the diversity of worldviews, of knowledge systems, all brought together by a shared core of shared values, of a common core of shared values, as articulated in human rights norms and principles. We do have an ethical lens, and some of you may be aware of the 2021 recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. It provides this kind of ethical framework and guidance as we look at AI and its application in different domains, including in education and research. In terms of policy, a humanistic approach is also one that is concerned with equity and inclusion as the main policy lens, as the main lens through which to analyze and assess public policies, whether in education or beyond. And particularly for education, and as it relates to technology, that what we could say a human-centered approach, but basically that understanding that education is rooted in social interaction. And we did see in our close monitoring of school closures with the COVID disruption, we rediscovered, if you want, the importance of the physical and social space of the school. With our mantra of learning never stops, we also discovered that school education is much more than academic learning. It also includes all the social and civic dimensions, the interpersonal development, the personal development, the social emotional development. We also discovered that schools, or rediscovered, that schools are much more than education. And in terms of concern with equity, schools are important vehicles for social cohesion, for more equitable opportunities in life, whether we're thinking of the protective function of schools, the school feeding programs, or other aspects. In looking at the COVID disruption, we obviously focused also on this unique deployment of technology, digital technologies. A piece that we have recently published entitled as a question, in EdTech Tragedy, looking at educational technologies and school closures during the times of COVID-19, looking at really assessing the many promises of EdTech in terms of improved access to education, in terms of more inclusive, equitable educational opportunity, improved quality, and assessing that against the reality of what played out. That analysis also looks further at implications on well-being, on the environment, issues around data and surveillance. And pleased to know that Ben Williamson is delivering the keynote just after this. We drew also on quite a bit of his work around the association between digitalization and increased acceleration of privatization and commercialization of education. So that one piece that was just released earlier this month, an EdTech Tragedy, educational technologies and school closures during COVID-19. We also released at the Digital Learning Week that Moira mentioned earlier this month, this guidance on generative AI in education and research. A number of controversies around generative AI and in risks of narrowing the knowledge commons, and other challenges also outlined there that you may be interested in. And the last to mention, because we did have quite a bit of convergence this year, the Global Education Monitoring Report this year focused on technologies in education, with the subtitle a tool on whose terms, and that looks at the experience of technologies more largely, not just digital technologies, and actually not too much on artificial intelligence, but it looks at technology, the experience longer term of technologies in education through the lenses of relevance, equity, scalability, sustainability. So I just wanted to flag those pieces that might be of interest, and very pleased to be able to just come in and say these few words at the beginning of this summit, co-organized by NORRAG and the Center for Sociodigital Futures. Back to you, Moira.
Thank you so much, Sohbi, for that fantastic welcome and the reminder of the work that UNESCO has been doing in this area. And also I think it was a few months ago, one of the key documents in ethics and AI was actually ratified by 193 states in UNESCO. It wasn't specifically on education, and so we are very, very pleased also to have this, the guidance note from UNESCO, and to have this session looking into specifically the ethics of AI and education. And with no further ado, moving on to our keynote, Critical Perspectives on AI in Education, by Ben Williamson, who is and has been for a while a leader in the research of the digital and education, and was prescient enough to be putting together a book on AI and education before the dam broke of ChatGPT. So welcome, Ben. We're very pleased to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Moira, and thank you, Sohbi, and thank you, everybody, for coming along today. As is normal, you'll just have to forgive me a few moments while I just share some slides. Let me just get set up. Okay, we believe that the menu that you might be able to see at the top of the screen will float away once I get started in a moment. So thank you, yes, everybody, for coming along, and to NORRAG for inviting me to present this brief keynote this afternoon. So as I'm sure everybody in the virtual room here has noticed already, over the past year or so, artificial intelligence, AI, has been the subject of both considerable hype and hope, as well as significant anxiety and, for some, despair. And I've got no doubt that there have been some impressive technical advances in particularly generative AI. But applications of the kinds that we've been hearing so much about, like ChatGPT, Midjourney, Bard, DALL-E, and so on and so forth, are also, of course, highly controversial. So given the focus of today's event, what I want to focus on is a kind of a series of critical tensions and problems with the introduction of AI in education. And being critical here doesn't necessarily mean seeing AI as a bad thing. I've seen some really interesting ideas about the application of AI in education. But what being critical does mean is trying to challenge some of the assertions and some of the taken for granted assumptions that are circulating at the moment that AI can and indeed will inevitably lead to positive effects and transformations, or at least that is what is widely claimed. Now, I imagine almost everyone must have been exposed to multiple headlines in the media, like the ones that you can see here from the Financial Times, from The Guardian, and from Fox News. And there are many, many similar sorts of headlines about AI and what it's going to do in education. And most of these seem to follow or project a kind of similar narrative. And that narrative, we're told, is that AI is going to radically transform education, possibly even making schools and teachers obsolete. And that apparently is no bad thing. And in these particular pieces I've selected here, I particularly love the juxtaposition of the imagery. So it appears we're moving from a kind of black and white world of chalk and talk instruction to a full color future with the helping hand of robot teachers who are kind of lifting students up to new educational heights. But I would suggest that introducing AI into education is never going to be the kind of seamless or smooth transition that it's often imagined to be. So this kind of imagery presents what I think is a kind of highly caricatured, it presents a highly caricatured past as a kind of dark contrast to a bright fictional future of AI in education. And that is a future that only certain actors and authorities kind of want to happen. So one of our current tasks at the Centre for Sociodigital Futures, who one of the partners for today's event, is to trace out how seemingly desirable digital futures of learning are in actual fact constructed and circulated. And what we're trying to do is trace out how certain future visions then animate actions in the present. So it suggests that AI futures of education are not necessarily inevitable, despite the fact some of these technologies exist, but these futures are being kind of fabricated, projected, circulated. We're all made to, or we're all being persuaded that such futures are inevitable and in many ways beneficial. But as recent work that I've done with a bunch of colleagues, and you can see a couple of papers here, what we've been trying to do is to insist on a more social and historical view of what AI is, how it's evolved and developed over time, and in fact, how it's imagined to impact on education by a range of different stakeholders. And I'm drawing primarily on these two publications and a couple of other pieces in these brief remarks today. Now, to be clear, AI is a very slippery term. So lots of people who say we shouldn't really talk about AI at all. We should be much more specific. This is about machine learning or deep learning, or we should actually talk about there are particular organizations who use the term artificial intelligence in particular ways to maybe obfuscate the actual technical functioning or the social effects. AI makes things sound like they're magical, kind of out of human control and so on. So it's a really slippery and contested term. But nonetheless, I think we can at least begin to trace out a kind of, I suppose, three waves of AI research and development, which I think have some implications for how we think about AI in education too. So firstly, we have the kind of AI wave one of expert systems or knowledge models that emerged in the 1960s. We then had a kind of AI wave two of big data, machine learning, and predictive analytics from the early part of this century, the big data revolution, as we were all talking about 10, 15 years ago. And now we have this kind of third wave of generative AI, which is characterized by large language models, natural language processing, so-called transformers, or foundation models, as some refer. Now, perhaps critically for me, I think, what both the big data and the generative versions of AI mean is that AI is now being positioned as a kind of infrastructural underlayer to diverse educational operations and tasks. So if we understand AI as infrastructure, that means that it kind of operates as a kind of foundation for other applications to operate on top of. And I think that's primarily or one of the key ways in which we see AI developing in education at the current time. There are kind of AI infrastructure at the bottom of the stack, if you like, and then you have a range of platforms and applications that are mobilizing this artificial intelligence or set of artificial intelligence applications that exist or are made possible through the infrastructural layer. And if we understand AI as a kind of infrastructure, then I think that makes it especially important to inspect AI critically because of its potential to become fully embedded in our education system and potentially very, very difficult, if not impossible, to remove. So I just want to come at the rest of this talk and at some of the key critical issues from an observation that getting AI embedded at this kind of infrastructural layer is going to depend on educating people to use AI. And I've begun calling this somewhat playfully pedagogy-PT. And what I mean by pedagogy-PT is I'm trying to refer to a kind of an emerging industry of mostly corporate AI training initiatives that are intended to educate everyone to be an AI user. So if AI is going to be foundational to many industries and sectors, including education, then users are going to have to be accustomed to it in order to incorporate AI into their everyday habits and routines. And colleagues and I, in another piece, have referred to kind of AI training programs as habituation programs that connect everyday practices to AI capacities. And these training programs are, if you like, intended to make the user friendly. And this is a term I'm borrowing from Radhika Gurur and Julia today. Radhika's here today as well. And in their lovely paper about making the user friendly through particular education platforms, they argue that infrastructures and platforms have to make the user friendly so that users will respond amenably to what the technology and its advocates want the user to do with it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Pedagogy GPT courses make users friendly to AI infrastructures so that they might incorporate them into their everyday practices. And that's exactly what I think we're now beginning to see happening in relation to the training of teachers too. So, for example, we can see examples like the one at the top right here of the AI educator launching training courses so that teachers can take back their time by incorporating AI into their pedagogic practice. And we've also just in the last few weeks seen the release of a teaching with AI guide from OpenAI, of course, the originator of ChatGPT and DALL-E, among other generative AI applications. So OpenAI itself is now seeking to, as it were, habituate teachers into AI, to routinize, get teachers to routinize AI in their pedagogic practice. And the aim here appears to be to make AI-friendly teachers and AI-friendly schools who that will incorporate AI and synchronize it with their pedagogic and administrative practices and routines in what increasingly are envisaged as kind of AI-friendly education systems at huge scale. So what does making education and educators AI-friendly imply then? So firstly, for me, I think it implies a kind of a rethinking of our assumptions of educational expertise and authority. It demands that educators defer to a particular sort of authority in which AI is seen as a particularly powerful engine of educational transformation and knowledge making in education too. So the academic field of AI in education, or AI Ed, as it's often shortened, has long sought a form of authority on educational matters. And AI Ed scientists have assembled a variety of technical and psychological, primarily cognitive science-based approaches to advance the field of knowledge production and influence, strongly supported by a range of publications, professional and disciplinary associations, as well as industry partnerships. And there's a long history to the AI Ed field and its attempts to build this kind of authority. So AI-friendly teaching then seems to position what Roger Schank and Edelson in 1989 referred to the AI people, who might be primary authorities on learning. But if we take a slightly critical view of AI Ed and the AI people who work within that field as they've been characterized there, then arguably what we see here is a kind of narrow cognitive view of learning and of individual learning, of measurable individual learning. And what we see is a prioritization of a kind of engineering approach to how to improve education. An approach which, as Neil Selwyn has suggested, might sideline consideration of other social, political, and cultural aspects of education. And the kind of AI entrepreneurs who are keen on AI in education at the moment take an even narrower view. So if we take, for example, Sam Altman from OpenAI in his recent interviews about the prospects of ChatGPT and the like in education, he strongly talks about Benjamin Bloom's 2 Sigma Achievement Effect study of the late 1960s. This was a study of one-to-one tutoring and the benefits of one-to-one tutoring. And for Altman and for others, like Salman Khan from Khan Academy, the idea then is that learning could be boosted by automated chatbot tutors that can perform this kind of one-to-one tutoring. So it's a very, very particular view of learning and academic achievement cast in highly measurable type terms. Second, making teachers AI friendly also implies making them amenable to increased tech industry influence in public education systems. So industry participation has long been crucial to AI Ed, as an early report from the RAND Corporation indicated. So AI Ed has always relied on industrial high-tech infrastructure to a certain degree, but now perhaps even more so. So now it seems that getting AI into education is a fairly simple matter of getting routine ed tech platforms like learning management systems to integrate with an AI as a service provider from one of the global big tech firms. So, for example, really big ed tech firms like Coursera, that you can see in the example here, but also Blackboard, Duolingo, Khan Academy, and many others, are all now beginning to integrate OpenAI's GPT systems so that they can operate AI coaches or assistants or tutor bots or co-pilots. So these integrations of big tech AI into everyday ed tech that's routinely used in schools and universities, means that AI-friendly education appears to be becoming increasingly dependent on corporate resources and business practices located in firms in the global north. While at the same time, those integrations appear to promise the outsourcing of teachers' pedagogic autonomy to automated technologies. Now, this AI as a service integration model is, of course, highly attractive to investors and ed tech companies. This is seen as really good business. We have AI-friendly schools, then it is assumed they will eventually pay subscriptions for AI-driven services. Those AI-driven services will then drive up the value of the ed tech companies, whilst at the same time offsetting some of the significant costs of running AI models as well. So there is a strong kind of market logic underpinning some aspects of AI in education as it's currently proceeding. The third key point, or sort of critical perspective I want to bring here, is around the way in which making education AI friendly could also intensify a particular set of dominant policy approaches that we see across education systems internationally. So in their book, Algorithms of Education, How Datafication and AI Shape Policy, Cal Gulson, Sam Siller, and Taylor Webb have recently argued that AI synthesizes with existing political and policy priorities like performance-based accountability, auditing, optimizing efficiencies, and cost saving, and the other examples you can see in the book. So there's a particular way in which AI might intensify and accelerate particular policy approaches that many educators and education researchers already find deeply problematic. And this may come at the expense, of course, of other sorts of alternative possible policy models that might engage with broader issues of the social, the structural, the political and economic contexts and determinants of school and student performance, like, for example, austerity or massive underfunding. And perhaps even more troublingly at the kind of political level, making educators and schools AI friendly seems already to be leading to an amplification of certain kinds of quite repressive and regressive conservative politics. So in this case, reported recently from Iowa schools, ChatGPT made it very easy for schools to comply with new Republican laws that made it compulsory for schools to ban books from their libraries that featured any kind of sexual content. Now, the teachers here are just doing their job. They would have been held personally criminally responsible for not undertaking this task. But I think what this indicates, or what this provides a compelling example of, is how political context and political pressures can synthesize with AI to particular detrimental ends, rather than the inevitable kind of improvements and transformative effects that many AI advocates appear to promise. And I think as my fourth example here is what I refer to as degenerative AI, that making education AI friendly might ignore or sidestep the considerable potential of generative AI to exert degenerative effects on the content and knowledge that's taught and learned in schools. So critics point out that generative language applications like ChatGPT, for example, are nothing more than text prediction engines that are prone to producing plausible but inaccurate information, simply putting one word after another due to a kind of predictive formula. Now, there's some lovely kind of metaphors for this. Bruce Sterling, the writer, has referred to language models as like Frankenstein's monster, stitched up gatherings of many little dead bits and pieces with some voltage shot through them. And Matthew Kirschenbaum, the tech critic, has anticipated a coming text apocalypse with the internet overrun by synthetic text and misinformation, where it may become impossible to ascertain which sources or content have any authority or accuracy whatsoever. I think the implication here is that we could end up with kind of AI-friendly but text-apocalyptic schooling, where students are interacting more with stitched-up tutor bots that spout biased, Western-centric, inaccurate knowledge than they interact with professionally accredited, qualified, and knowledgeable educators. And this all raises, of course, a whole host of ethical questions and ethical controversies that I simply don't have time to go into today, but I think will become the basis of the following discussions. But I think there are some particular bullets here that I might pick out in relation to the focus on knowledge inequities today. One of those might be that the way in which particularly language models privilege English language, Western, global North forms of knowledge, whilst at the same time depending on the invisible labor or the ghost work of those who label data, scan data, and so on to produce the data sets, who are largely located in the global South, of course. But AI-friendly education appears to privilege innovation in the global North, but evades various ethical responsibilities, social justice and rights-based concerns, and perhaps reinforces quite a narrow conception of AI safety. And I recommend the Council of Europe report, but also the new report from UNESCO that Sohbi mentioned before as kind of extremely useful documents for taking this stuff forward, taking forward some of these conversations about ethical controversies. Okay, so we've got 1 minute left, so I just want to wrap up very briefly. So I'm looking forward to some of the discussions on some of these broadly kind of ethical problems of making education friendly to AI infrastructure. And I hope in the language of our times that my comments here can simply provide you with some prompts for more generative discussion later. But maybe just one final provocation. Maybe we should be thinking along with Dan McQuillan, he's a colleague at the Centre for Sociodigital Futures, who in his recent book, Resisting AI, has encouraged us to reject or resist current configurations of AI, particularly in our public services and our everyday lives. So AI, he suggests, is best understood as, quote, supercharged bureaucracy. He describes it as opaque, indifferent, distanced. It privileges efficiency at scale and statistical optimization as a technical solution to all social problems, including those of education. And Dan urges us instead to reclaim what he describes as an ethics of solidarity and care by learning from the social movements that have contended with technological developments in the past. And he suggests we should be aiming to remake AI in the interests of diverse publics rather than the interests of AI technologists and their supporters. So if we follow those kinds of encouragements, maybe then it's time for educators to get unfriendly with AI. Thank you very much for the invitation and for your time today. There are some notes on my research blog and available publications over on ResearchGate if you want to follow up any further. But thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ben. And we will make sure that we put those into the chat so that people can follow up on them easily. So we have a few questions already in the Q&A, and we have 10 minutes. So if anybody else has a question that they would like to have answered, do put it into the Q&A. Mike, I'm afraid machines were not specifically invited to participate, but any ones that are able to read your emails probably have been. Then we have a question from Rita, who is asking, what do you think is unique about impacts of AI on education compared with its impacts on other social activities?
Yeah, tricky one. I mean, the impacts on education and some of the ethical issues are very much going to be shared, particularly across other public services. So there's some really good stuff coming out recently from the Ada Lovelace Institution, which refers to some of these issues across public service areas like education, healthcare, and so on. So I think there are some shared areas. I think one area of particular sensitivity here is that often in education we're dealing with young people. So these are, a population with particular and unique needs, particularly when it comes to potential exposure to forms of inaccurate content. So I think it's UNESCO's Deputy Director for Education, Stefania,
the ADG,
referred earlier in the year to the very, very stringent accreditation processes that are required for textbooks in schools. And yet ChatGPT lands in schools more or less overnight, in a couple of weeks. A highly problematic technology, which is made accessible to school children at scale, without school children having any of the kind of basic AI literacy, as it's often referred to be able to tell kind of authoritative knowledge from fabricated, machine-produced knowledge. So I think that's issues like that. I think are, I think particularly unique to education. But I take the point that a lot of the concerns around AI in education are ones that are shared across other public services as well as elsewhere. And I actually think a productive way forward would be for education and organizations in those adjacent sectors to have some joined up thinking.
Great. And then we've got two questions that look at education and across two other aspects of society. So there's one which is basically from Sarah asking how much our forms of political economy we should be unfriendly to, as opposed to just their technical manifestations. And then also Michelle asks about tests on the health risks for teachers and students when using such technology.
Health risks.
Health risks when using AI, if you know any tests or research on that?
I can't speak specifically to the health risks, I don't think, but I've certainly seen some writing around the particular risks that AI might pose to cognition. I'm not a cognitive scientist, so this is not necessarily my my track, but there are particular concerns from a kind of cognitive perspective that excessive the use of AI prevents particularly young people from going through particular processes which develop good cognitive functioning and so on. And it seems to me that considerably more work should be done on that from those from a kind of cognitive persuasion. I take the point about the political economy question because I think AI is very difficult to separate from political economy. I think this is one of the points that Dan McQuillan's making in his book, is that you can't separate the code and the computation from the political and economic context in which both AI is produced and in which it's kind of deployed and used. And that's why I find the example from the Iowa schools quite compelling in that sense. But I think it's also important to look at current fascinations for AI in various education systems in relation to a kind of geopolitical arms race for dominance in AI. I think it's very clear that if you look at education policy documents that fixate on artificial intelligence in particularly the US and in China, my colleague Jeremy Knox on a big study of AI in the Chinese context, but also in Europe, we see a kind of an attempt to educate children with AI, or aims to educate children with AI, so that they have particular kind of AI skills that are kind of STEM skills that can then be deployed to superpower the digital economy. That's spelled out especially clearly in the national education policy reforms in India in 2020, specifically talking about we're going to use AI to kind of empower our kids to become an AI superpower. So I think we need to be conscious of that, whilst at the same time looking at the ways in which AI is being deployed to support, amplify particular political preoccupations and agendas, as it is already in the US conservative context.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question on what would the social laboratories look like that you mentioned in the final slide? Paint us a picture.
I genuinely don't know at the moment, but this is this Sociodigital Futures Centre. This is one of our kind of key research questions, and it's for later in the life cycle. But one of the things that we have been doing is looking at alternative organizations that are trying to develop alternative ways of approaching AI or algorithms more broadly. And the idea here is, how might we design more participatory, consultative, deliberative fora where those who are most likely to be affected by AI or algorithmic systems, have some say in how those are developed. People like Dan McQuillan are looking a little further back to things like the Luddite movement and, particular forms of historical resistance to labor exploitation through technologies and so on. My sense is it's a significant agenda for us as education to explore both what we can learn from the social laboratories of the past in relation to technological resistance, if we think technological resistance is the right way, but also to engage with the various different community-based organizations that are already trying to develop new ways of engaging with technology. And there are examples. The DARE Institute in the States, for example, a range of community-based organizations in the UK that are particularly focused on the racializing effects of AI and engaging with diverse communities to advocate for AI differently.
Great, thank you. And now we have a question from Daniel Shepherd asking if you've started to see any differences in which certain education systems or contexts are more easily penetrated by AI technology. So, for example, fragile contexts with less regulatory oversight, maybe?
I don't, at the moment, have any clear empirical sense of that. I mean, I think there are arguments that in education systems that are more marketized, a bit more commercialized and privatized, that there are existing openings for AI applications. So in the English education policy context, for example, we have a kind of an edtech strategy, which is very pro-business, it's very pro-innovation. It has opened the door to a market of edtech providers. And through that, AI, which is now being integrated into edtech, is, kind of pushing an open door in this context. My understanding in other European contexts is that there are quite different sets of arrangements and different kind of gatekeeping organizations that might that might be positioned to kind of hold back some of the kind of the excesses of the North American big tech AI that at the moment seems to be kind of getting into every edtech application that there is. But I think it's a really good empirical question about how AI weaves into or is resisted to some degree in different educational systems internationally.
Wonderful. I'm going to take a last couple of questions that are really sort of more global questions, and then there are some specific questions on ethical issues that I think can also be answered in the panels that we have coming later. But just to finish up your section, there is a question from Purna about how should AI be included into the curriculum of schools and colleges? And then from Rim asking, what would be a safe and balanced utilization of AI in education? And Mermoz and Raza saying, what would AI stop creativity, diversity, and innovation?
Good questions. Should AI be in the curriculum? Yeah. Possibly not in the form that it's being imagined. That would be my view. It's going to be very difficult to stop in many ways, but I think we need to stop with the kind of the inevitability narrative and destabilize that. I do think, however, that it seems like we should be seeking to engage our students in discussions about AI and its social and economic implications. Some people refer to this as AI literacy. It's a difficult term because AI literacy is also used as a term by the AI industry to refer to the particular kinds of skills to use AI. But I think a particular form of critical AI literacy awareness of some of the implications of these technologies, not just how they function technically, is important. Where we can squeeze that into schools, I don't know. It seems to be something that should be quite straightforward for people to integrate into their higher education courses. And there are lots and lots of examples of this around. So the Critical AI group in the States have written a number of things and are running an event, I think, at the beginning of October on precisely that. Can AI stop creativity and so on? I think we only need to look at things like the writers' strikes in Hollywood at the moment and the lawsuits by published authors to see that there is great concern amongst people who have quite successful and professional careers in the creative industry with the potential of AI. I don't think that we should be within our schools and universities supporting the idea that AI can be some kind of substitute for our kind of creative pursuits and passions. my sense is that would be the worst possible effect of AI in many ways. We want to retain something. I can understand the use of, safe and balanced utilization of AI might be to perform some kind of mundane routine tasks that actually do suck up an awful lot of our time. But I think that's quite distinct from the use of AI as a kind of substitute for creative writing, for thinking and media production of many kinds.
Wonderful.
Hopefully these things will get taken up in the panels afterwards.
Thank you so much for your intervention today, Ben. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure everybody is applauding you virtually as we close this first session. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Ben. Bye.
Thank you very much.